that. Tonight's session is all about the tools and processes for being financially accountable as governance board members. We were just saying before that running this workshop's kind of like at that point in a board meeting when the financial report comes out, people's eyes start to glaze over.
So true.
Really? Yeah, but we do know that financial accountability is one of the key stewardship roles of a board. And really, really important that we keep an eye on the detail of the finances. And I'm speaking from experience that I've been on boards myself, despite the fact that I consult with boards and help boards to be the best they can be. I've been on boards where finances have gone awry. As a board, we've taken our eye off the finances.
Right, people.
So we're going to talk tonight just a few different things around what we can do as board members to make sure that we keep our organisations healthy. So what I might do is I am going to mute you all just so that we can cut down some background noise. So if you need to speak, you will have to unmute yourself. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides with you. I just want to spend a couple of minutes looking at some research that was done on Australian and New Zealand not-for-profit organisations around fraud. And a whole range of questions were asked of organisations, and most people agreed that for their organisations, if they were victims of fraud, it would be catastrophic. And most people said that actually it was a problem in the sector, but that most of it was undetected, and that the risk of being undetected was quite low. They thought they were really quite vigilant, and that it was impossible for a fraudster to be able to do damage to them. 43%, so that's nearly half of the people, said that prevention for fraud was really important, but only 30% had risk strategies in place. So people believe that their organisations are safer than they are. Only just over a third of the people did checks on new employees and on volunteers, which is interesting, because actually I can tell you in my experience in our sector in New Zealand, fraud is rife in our organisations. And sometimes we think about fraud as that people who deliberately are tipping your organisation's bank account into their bank account, but fraud looks different in many different ways. It's about putting extra expenses on credit cards. It's about claiming things that aren't work related, and at one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum is actually setting up, one organisation I work with set up a fake employee, and someone was actually collecting their salary. And so for some reason my slides aren't going to change. Here we go. But most people said that it was okay because you could trust staff and volunteers, and that the culture of our organisation stops people from having fraud. But half said that their auditors not discovered any, so it's okay, and that they had processes in place and good controls. But actually 20% of the people actually had a policy that was adhered to. So we have quite good ideals about fraud, and we've got really positive thinking about it. But I can tell you I've worked with lots and lots of organisations who have been shocked when they've discovered that they have been victims of fraud. And most fraud is occurred by people over the age of 50 and are paid employed in a non-accounting role. And can I say that white women of my age, people that look like me, are some of the biggest culprits of fraud in organisations. And one of the reasons that people fraud organisations is because they have gambling problems or financial issues at home. So most people in our sector who fraud us are not because they're con people or they deliberately set out to do damage, but actually there's things going on for them. They see the opportunity to help them out of a pickle, so they think, oh, I'll just take some of this money and I'll pay it back later. Not saying that there aren't people who deliberately go out there and steal from us, but actually it's just mostly to get themselves out of a pickle. The interesting thing is that over half of the people in our sector do not report fraud to the police, because they're afraid that if that gets out, first of all, they're exposed as not doing a very good job of looking out for it, but that their reputation will be impacted on. But what we do know is that most fraudsters, actually, it's reoccurring, that if they move to another organisation, they do it again. So it's a bit of an ethical dilemma for us, yeah? whether or not we report someone. And fraud, it happens not only just through volunteers and through staff, but I've actually worked with organisations where the chairperson has frauded and did all sorts of things like didn't call meetings for months on end until eventually everyone got in and realised what had been happening. So the moral of the story is fraud is everywhere, team. And we need to have our processes in place. So we have to monitor well, we have to keep our eye out for fraud. But the financial responsibilities as boards is not just about looking out for fraud, but also making sure that our organisations are healthy and that we have money in place to do what we need to do into the future. Another piece of research done in 1996 in the USA looked at accountability lapses and the different types of behaviours of boards. So stealing, fraud and embezzlement were there, and like private incurements are taking assets or creating contracts or deals to benefit yourself. And mismanagement and ineffective operation were counted as accountability lapses. So these are boards not paying attention. The interesting thing about these accountability lapses, though, is look at them. They can all be prevented and structures put in place to stop them from happening. What we just have to realise as boards that better that we prevent these things from happening than having to deal with them down the track. And like I said, we're going to look at some tools to help with that. So first I'm going to put you into groups. Actually, I think I might put you into pairs, and I'm just going to get you to introduce yourselves and have a conversation about what do you feel most vulnerable about when it comes to your not-for-profits finances as a board member. So have a conversation as a board member. How do you feel really vulnerable in that role when it comes to finances? So I'm just going to, Zoom's not perfect. Okay. What I'm just going to invite you to do is to introduce your partner and maybe share some of the vulnerabilities that you feel currently being a board member. So before you speak, I am going to get you to unmute yourself because you are all muted. Just want to invite someone to start.
Well, I'll start.
Thank
you,
Kitty.
I talked with Marjorie, who is down on the corner on the other side of the screen, and we're sort of both in an arty kind of group where we keep an eye on the finances. Marjorie is doing counting, you know, the sales for the day, and says that's the hardest part. She does it with somebody else, so there's always a cover up, but she finds that the hardest part. And but yeah, there's a lot of trust with the group, and both of us feel that, you know, it's not our most comfortable part of the committee meetings, but relying on the trust of and the comments and the way other people look at the numbers as well makes it all okay.
Right. So high reliance on other board members, yeah? Cool.
Pardon?
So you have a high reliance on other board members?
Yeah.
Oh. Thank you, Kitty. Marjorie, do you want to go next? Anything to add?
Well, I think Kitty explained more her position, which is not being comfortable with all the details and the finances and relying on other people. My situation was that I'm with the theatre company and it's counting the takings of the performance the night before and then doing the banking and so on. And it's I always do it with somebody else. It's just cash around, and we have had problems with, well, one or two slight problems with this aspect, and with the changes in members and numbers. We felt at the end of last year we should change the numbers on the safe.
Okay. Yeah. A couple of really good examples of controls that we can put in place, yeah? One is always having two people involved when there's chaos. And the other is constantly changing passwords and codes. Especially when people leave. Excellent.
Yes.
Marjorie, who wants to go next?
I can.
Thanks, Jenna.
I was working with Astrid, and we're both in pretty small groups. Astrid's with the garden group, and I'm on the secretary for the gym board, like our community gym board in Rawene. And we talked about how. Oh, we need to mute someone here. We talked about how, in my case, I completely trust our board, our treasurer, and it never even occurred to me to question her. She's questioned her integrity, and she's new to our board, and has worked for a number of organisations in other places in New Zealand, and it never occurred to me to check with those organisations. It just made me realise that it never.
It'll disappear off the site. You can be with it as you wish.
Yeah. So did you bring her from the outside of your organisation, Janet?
Yes, our treasurer left town, and we put out a note amongst gym members, and she volunteered, and she's been magnificent. But I'm kind of intrigued, and I never did. I don't think we did due diligence.
Yeah, and that's because we don't want to suspect people. We always want to believe in the best in people. For most of us in community organisations, that's why we work in those community organisations, is because we do believe in the best in people. Yeah. But there are occasions where that can get us into trouble. Thanks, Janet. Esther, do you want to go next?
Yeah, okay. I think Janet and I talked about the thing that makes us vulnerable is that model of very high trust, low accountability. So in the organisation I'm in, we've got one person who does all of our financial stuff, and the rest of us just trust her that it's being done. We don't always check the work or look over it. So her level of accountability is actually quite low.
Yeah.
So it's probably something that we need to really look at. Yeah. And also it's cover for her too, if something was to go wrong. It's cover for her if we all have a bit more of a, not control, but an eye on what's going on.
Yeah. So just taking time out to make sure that you know what's going on, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Astrid. Next. We got Dean with us.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I'm having a few issues here.
That's okay.
When Heather and I were talking, the internet froze either at my house or her house, so we didn't get very far in the discussion. But what I'm the chair of a fairly large NGO in town. I won't tell you who it is, but out of tonight already, I've got a couple of questions to ask when I get back. But we're quite lucky that we have an accountant on staff. CEO is very honest, and we have an accountant on the board as well. So I just talked to Heather, and I always try to look for discrepancies month to month and year on year. So since I've been there, we've changed the financial reporting to allow a percentage change from the same month last year, so that if something goes up 80%, we can go, hang on, what's that? Or if it's steady, you know that you've had an audit. Auditors would have found, well, hopefully would have found something. So the percentages are quite handy in your P&L. So I've sort of adopted that as my safeguard as to what we're looking for.
Cool. Like what Dean's talking about, we call budget variance, yeah? So we have a look and say, at the same time last year, what is the difference between what we're seeing now and before? And in an organisation I used to work for, if there was any 10% variance, either from the previous year or from the budget, then the CEO had to explain what that variance was. So you can either compare with previous years or you can compare with your budget. But unless you're comparing your figures with something else, they're a little bit meaningless. Yeah? So we'll talk about that. Let's pop on to Darwin while Sue sorts out his sound. Darwin, how did you get on?
Yep, good. I went in with Kerry for our discussion. Probably like the two things for the group I'm in would be our secretary treasurer has done the role for a very long time, and she's very efficient.
Yeah.
And like we do have things like dual signing for the banking to pay bills online, etc. In fact, she loads them and then two other people authorize them, so just to keep things separate. But if she was to go at short notice, we'd probably lose a lot of intel, just read the systems and what she's using, so we need to fix up that. And also just probably because they are okay financially, they came in and they were doing a big renovation, and like maybe not enough queries on the costings that the property managers had provided, and it turned out they'd only got quote from one firm.
Yep.
So I made them go back and get more because it was way higher than what I thought.
Yep.
And then just like in terms of controls, the organisation I actually work for, I'm subject to with my consent, a police check every year, a check in Australia and New Zealand, and a compulsory 2-week break from work, annual leave, where I have no access to work systems or even my emails on my phone. So that's just a fraud check.
Yeah. So a couple of good examples of controls, having staff take a break and also having police checks. So the reason why staff take a break in big organisations and a lot of financial institutions is usually that's when it's discovered that something's out of the ordinary, when someone else comes in to do their job for a couple of weeks. So quite often when large organised fraud is happening, like people have put on a fake person and they're collecting salary, or they're just skimming slowly off the top, it's when they go on holiday that sort of thing gets discovered. So one of the signs of a person who may be frauding your organisation is they never take leave, But we all know that for health and safety reasons, people should take leave anyway, so not just for detecting fraud. We should be making people take breaks. Thanks, Del. And so as board members, the buck stops with us, and so we need to know this stuff. Most CEOs, my experience, they're not trying to lie to their boards, but sometimes they feel that having to go to the boards means the board doesn't trust them, or it's going to slow down the process, or but definitely you're right, it's your responsibility to be given all the information you need to be. Thanks, Kerry. Gordon, how about you? How did you get on?
I've been one of these ones who have avoided any treasury role like the plague. And it's been bliss for me so far. I don't really understand any financial documents, and anything that I have been involved with, that the treasurer, especially being in a small town, I've usually been treasurer for years, and they're generally as straight as a die. I have been involved with some other organisations, not in committee level, where there's been horrific fraud, and so my position, I've been involved with committees which have had huge budgets, like multi-million-dollar budgets, but that is mainly through building projects, which I can understand those costings rather than a financial statements from year to year. So I've left it with everybody else, and I'm happy with that. But
Nolene, how did you get on?
I was with Libby, and we were talking about, I was just talking about how we're actually just transitioning at the moment into a board. But at the head of our organisation, we've got a very, very skilled, person who deals with money, and also she has got a very qualified helper with her, so I don't have any problems, with that, and I would trust both of them, like with my life and my own money. It's not something that I think that's going to cause me, but I do know how to I do know how to look at a budget sheet and everything like that, so I will be looking, when they come in duly each year, and I know what I'm looking for because I used to be in funding, so
Got some
I look forward to quite a bit of, excitement.
Nigel, anything to add?
It was me. Yeah, I was with Northland.
Okay.
I think we were sort of saying with the organisations that were involved in, if they had good, competent people working in that role, then that gave us quite a good sense of security around them understanding what the business was and being able to give us the information that we needed if things were changing, like around funding or other things like that. And, then it was up to us to be asking the questions to make sure that we were getting a good picture of anything that is changing.
Yeah.
So I think, we were sort of pretty confident as long as there were people in the organisation that understood it.
Yeah.
And then the level of understanding that we had wouldn't be to the same detail as they had, but enough to get an overall picture of what the finances for the organisation were like.
And I like the point there about asking the questions, having enough to ask the questions. Thanks. Jo, how about you? Anything to add?
I guess one of the things that, even with good processes in place, is when you do fundraising and you have cash. That is, I think, most groups' Achilles heel, because it's really, really difficult to ensure, to get two people in one place to count money and to make sure that none of it's siphoned off. And I don't know, unless you're going to be personally involved in every single fundraising thing, on how you change that. But,
So, a lot of small organisations don't have the people power to have two people with the cash.
I was the treasurer in the very beginning of my time with the group 10 years ago. But we now have an accountant, so that makes my life a lot easier. But because I have access to the bank accounts, I just look at transactions on the bank statement. That tells a big story of where money's going. And using good processes with meetings and making sure that new people to committee are discouraged from spending money without first having brought it to a committee meeting and having prior approval for expenditure.
So two things there, prior approval and having good policies about how money gets spent. Two things that we need to have in place. Thanks, Jo. Mandy, how did you get on?
Good. I came onto my group as treasurer, but before I took the position over, I said I wanted the books 100% up to date, and I wanted to understand them, because I haven't been a treasurer before and I didn't know what was involved. I had been a financial planner in Australia, but people misunderstand that and suddenly think I should know how to do accounting. And nothing could be further from the truth, but I can put an eagle eye on everything. And I guess one of my concerns was that they were running out of checkbooks, which, to me, they were prehistoric. And so I said before I took over that they'd have to agree to doing electronic, but still came up with the issue of people going down the road and getting quotes and saying, yes, go ahead and doing it before they brought it back to the group for approval. But that's nothing compared to what my partner, you just put me through to, Shannon, went through. She's lived my worst nightmare. So ask her, she's interesting.
All right, Shannon, you're on.
Oh, hi. So I was elected as a chair onto a health and social services board about 2 years ago, and spent about 15 months sifting through everything, uncovering a whole lot of fraud, and had to pay a lot of money back and had to close the service down and file everything to IRD. So that was my first time working on a board. But
and it's hard, when organisations shut down because of something like that.
There was no minute. Well, it bummed out what I wanted to do anyway, but Yeah, it was just the basics really, and and no one wanted to be held accountable. So there was no minutes, there was no receipts, but there was transactions going back and forth in bank accounts by people that weren't even on the board.
Yeah,
it was just crazy. It was just like crazy. Yeah, it sounds so bad now that I'm saying.
Shannon mentioned Inland Revenue there. Can I say
Yeah.
that a lot of organisations get into a pickle because of their inland revenue obligations? Don't realise when they're looking at accounts, are we looking at something that's GST inclusive or GST exclusive? Some people mistakenly think that because they're a not-for-profit, they don't have to pay PAYE or GST. They do. And some people don't have the right legal status. So they think they're a not-for-profit that's registered to not pay tax, but actually earn more than $10,000 a year, so do have to pay tax. So really paying attention to the tax obligations of your organisation is critical. Inland Revenue is one of the few people that can go in and make individual board members accountable for the financial management of the organisation. So if the organisation was to owe a lot of money, they could come after you as individuals. So really paying attention to tax is vital. And also little things like when you look at balance sheets, which we'll talk about later, if there isn't a GST amount of money sitting in the liabilities, it's like, where's the GST money we owe? Asking questions like that. Thanks for that, Shannon. Bart, do you have anything to add?
Not really, no. We are, I guess, lucky with a few board members who have that expertise. And also when we started, we did find an accountant who helped set up all the systems.
Yeah.
And he's actually still sort of the financial advisor. If we have any questions about finance related, then we ask him, and yeah, that helps, I guess.
So good to have an expert on the board, huh? Or an expert that will provide information for the board. Marjorie, do you have a question?
Yes, going back to the IRD, I've been told, I don't know how true this is, obviously, but it was my belief that if you're an incorporated society, then you're not liable for mistakes by the board. Is that true or is that untrue? I don't know.
You're not liable. It is an independent body, but you have a duty of care.
Yeah.
As a board to make sure that you're doing your job.
Yeah.
And you must stick to the objectives of your organisation. So if things were to go wrong, and there was a lot of money involved, people like Inland Revenue might step in. Highly unlikely though, doesn't often happen. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty much you're protected if you're an incorporated society as long as you stick to the rules.
Yes.
And you pay attention and do your job.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you're doing your job and things still went wrong, then you're not liable.
Okay.
Thanks, Marjorie. Julia, are you happy to go next?
Sure. So for us in our charitable trust, I belong to a small NGO called Achieve to Be. The way that we run it is that I is probably in charge of the operational side of it. I manage all the finances and report to the board. I try and account for every dollar I spend, and I also have Xero and Smart Pay that are the tools that I use to help the software products that we use to help manage our finances. And what we do is we ensure that the budget that we set for the year matches our outgoings, and that is reported obviously monthly to the board.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Julia. So having again a benchmark to measure against and having processes in place. Steve, have we heard from you?
No, you haven't heard from us. That's fine. I was paired with Anne. You had me scared to death, frankly, Sandy. I was confidently predicting that we were all sorted in terms of policies and procedures, having taken quite a strong stance towards accountability. And you then, because I don't believe that we are unique in doing that, it's quite clear that we can't let the guard down. And the only answer that I see for this is making sure that whilst it's tempting as a small organisation to trust and hive off responsibility to your treasurer, you can't be unaware of what's going on in the cash book, the account, and there's got to be a constant understanding. So whilst I hate finance, as a chairman, I've got to have a general understanding of where we are with the finance. It pisses me off no end, but it's there, it's part of the job, I suppose. It's somewhat depressing.
But we can put things in place, make sure that we do have good expertise. And like I said, if we and we've done background checks and know that they're trustworthy, then we can rely on other people to support us.
What I'm worried about is where we have taken a very belt and braces type approach with all sorts of accountability type procedures put in place. I wonder where that crosses into paranoia and where it signals a strong message of no trust, and that's not something you want to put into any organisation. So I'd be very keen to find out where that delicate balance is, that lovely line of developing trust in your volunteers. In our group, it's not paid employees; these are volunteers, and you want people to step up and play a part in a role that's really quite responsible.
Yes. And that's the constant tension that we have as a board, between the fact that we're volunteers and this is part-time versus actually we have some quite solid responsibilities as board members in terms of compliance and what we're responsible for. But if you have the systems in place and you have the processes in place, then things should go smoothly. So having good policies and procedures and making sure that we ask the right questions is us doing our job. I think we've heard from everyone, haven't we? It sounds like quite a few are working with cash, and it's definitely a vulnerable place. And again, with volunteers, does create an issue for us. But we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, like you're saying, in terms of the culture and encouraging people to come on board. We don't want to over police things, do we? Otherwise it's not going to be an enjoyable place to be a volunteer. So that's that tension that we have to do the balance between. So I'm just going to share a couple of slides with you. And this is Truman, who was quite famous for saying the buck stops here and being accountable for anything that happened in his government, and even for decisions that he delegated to other people, that the fact he delegated them, he was still held himself responsible for the outcome. And the thing is, board members, as we've talked about before, is the most important thing we can do is to ask questions. And the foremost important word you can say as a board member is, I don't get it. And to just keep asking questions. And if we ask questions and we say we don't understand, that's us doing our due diligence. I get a bit upset sometimes when I hear about boards that are too afraid to ask the treasurer questions because they feel foolish, or the questions they get back are in accountant speak, and so they feel like that's too difficult for them to understand. So I really encourage you all to create a culture where it's okay to say the words, I don't get it, and people don't feel foolish, because all of us sometimes don't get it. I'm what I call non-numerate, so I can add up 4 numbers 3 times and get a different answer every time. I confess that out there. So I had to teach myself how to read finances and financial information when I became the head of an organization. So it is learnable, but it is difficult for a lot of us. So we have to feel okay about asking those questions. Here's the examples of the types of questions that we can ask, Is this what we budgeted for? Do we have enough cash? A big one that we don't often ask is, are we solvent? If we're solvent, that means that we have enough money to do what we have promised we're going to do. So this is a big issue for a lot of us currently in the COVID crisis. that we have continued to deliver, but we've had a hold on funding, like the pub charities put holds on our funding. Which means that we're insolvent. So government has actually changed the Trustees Act temporarily, that our directors can trade as insolvent currently, but normally it's actually against the law. And are we spending our right money on the right things? And some of you talked about that, getting quotes, yeah? Getting a right number of quotes. If you're lucky enough to have investments, it's like, are our investments actually bringing us what they could do, or do we have all our money sitting in cash accounts? Unfortunately, investing money in short-term accounts right now doesn't generate the kind of money it did once upon a time. But related to looking at finances is also looking at what is it that we're doing. So our finances tell us a story. And if we look at them as like a puzzle, if we have a look at what our money has been spent on, that tells us what's going on in the organisation. So it's not just about numbers, it's about the people activity behind those numbers that we need to pay attention to. Does anyone have any questions? Put your hand up, Bart. You'll have to look for electronic hands because I can't see anyone right now. So we all have roles and accountabilities. So we have our treasurer who's got particular accountabilities they have to the group. Each of us as board members have roles and accountabilities, as does the manager. And if our organisation is big enough, we will have finance staff. For some of you, it sounds like you have volunteers helping you with the finances. I'm just going to give you a bit of an activity. This was emailed out to you as one of the handouts. I'm just going to invite you to, by yourselves, just sit there and link up. Who is the board accountable to and what is their role? So the first column is the person, the second column is who they're accountable to, and the third column is their role. So these are all mixed up. So I'm just going to invite you to work out which one gets connected with which. Are you ready for me to show you the answers?
Yes.
Right, here we go. Okay, so our board is accountable to our stakeholders, and their job is to ensure that there's adequate plans, reports, and controls in place, yeah? So the board is accountable to the whole community, all of the stakeholders involved. Our CEO is accountable to the board and make sure that things are operating within the expenditure plans. So we can delegate our work to the CEO, but we are always accountable to our stakeholders, yeah? That the CEO is accountable to us as a board. If we're lucky enough to have finance staff, they're accountable to the manager or the CEO, and of course they're doing the recording and the counting, and they're doing the receipting and sending out invoices. Our treasurer is accountable to the board as a whole, but actually gets into detail with the manager and the CEO. So they kind of have a partnership with the manager and the CEO. So there's a mutual piece of work going on there. And then they report to the board on financial position and practice. So the treasurer often has a funny role, yeah? That they're not actually accountable to anyone, but actually they work on behalf of the board. So I was doing a piece of work with an organisation the other day who will help us to understand the job of a treasurer. The answer to the question, what is the job of a treasurer, is it depends. Yeah, it depends on the organisation and what the organisation needs from the treasurer. If you have a lot of finance staff and a CEO, then the treasurer may just have a oversight role. If you don't have finance staff and the manager might be a volunteer, then the treasurer might be doing some of the accounting. The important thing is that you give your treasurer a job description and it's clear what they are responsible for. But you cannot delegate your accountability as a board to your treasurer, yeah? They are not solely responsible for what's going on. So,
in smaller organisations, can I just take you up on that last point?
Yep.
The treasurer and working closely with, say, the chair,
yep.
And I'm thinking about my own organisation, relatively small group, you know, there's the potential there for a very cosy relationship. And very open, therefore, perhaps to abuse.
Yeah.
So we are going to have to just be very clear on the roles and make sure that there is accountability continuously.
That's right.
are there any standards to which one can aspire? You know, like models of policies and procedures that we can look up to make sure, yeah, whether we've got that one, we've got that one, we've got that. No, we're missing that one. You know, is there something that we can?
There is a website called communitynet.net.nz, and they collect together some policies and procedures. And also there's a tool called Navigator that's developed in New Zealand that gives you some tools. And the best overseas source of information I've seen is a group called Mango out of South Africa. They have quite a few tools that boards can use as well. So that's Mango as in the fruit.
Thank you. So communitynet.org?
I'm pretty sure it's communitynet.net. I have a funny feeling.
Right, okay. Thank you.
What they call CommunityNet. So as you say, we've got to have clear and agreed to roles so everybody knows what everyone is doing. So terrible if the board thinks that the treasurer is paying really close attention to things and the treasurer thinks that their job is just to look at the big picture. Yeah. And also preferably have more than one person in each role. So preferably don't have the CEO as the treasurer or the chairperson as the treasurer. Try to separate it out. And not always that easy, yeah? But I think it was Joe, someone before was saying at the check-in, it's about protecting yourself as well. So if you are the chairperson or you're the CEO, you don't want to take in that role so that you are protecting yourself. One of the key things that boards have to do or should be doing is doing a budget for their organisation. And a few years ago, some information came out of Harvard Business School saying that budgets are a waste of time and that they actually constrain businesses from doing what they need to do, and that budgets, you know, a month after they're created are out of date. And to my dismay, a lot of organisations took up that philosophy. But I have to really warn groups that don't have a budget, as this is one of your fundamental documents that you need to have to be able to monitor what's going on in your organisation. Your budget provides the benchmark for your health. Here's what we expect to get into our organisation, and here's how we're going to spend it. And at your meetings, just looking at that and saying, are we on track for what we thought we were going to do? So your budget is a key document. Anyone got any thoughts on what the board's role and responsibility is in budgeting? What's the board's role? Anyone? Gordon?
Oversight.
Oversight, yeah. What does oversight look like?
Just making sure that everything is accounted for and budgeted properly, that you're using your correct keys.
Yep.
Keys, and you go to the basic core of where your income is from, and based on, like, I'm working at a museum. Ours is based on the number of visitors. Yep. You know, and that's how we estimate our income, and conversely after that, expenses.
Anyone else got any thoughts on the board's role?
Yeah, my view is that before you get to that level of concern about the procedures and protocols, you've got to have some kind of direction, and that is, you know, in line with and responsible to the stakeholders. But if there's a new project that you know, ideal being sought, they're the ones who are creating that whole energy for direction change or movement. So the procedures and protocols and all that stuff comes afterwards.
That's right. You're absolutely right. The board sets the direction as to what we're going to achieve, and then the budget follows, yeah? How are we going to allocate resources for us to be able to do what we do? Yeah.
But it also has to be very realistic.
It has to be realistic. And
speaking as an accountant.
And what's really tempting is that when we do our budget, we discover, oh, we don't have enough money for what we do. Oh, we'll just add 15% on our fundraising budget to make it balance. It's like, well, how are you going to raise that extra 15%? Or people just look at the previous year and go, oh, well, we'll just do half what we did last year. You have to actually make it realistic. Use previous amounts, and like some of you said, get proper quotes, yeah, realistic quotes. But budgeting shouldn't be a guessing game. It shouldn't just be pulling figures out of the sky. It should be based on something real. And you're better off having a really conservative budget that looks really good than you are having a hopeful budget, yeah?
I think the board's role is that the board need to be accountable for the budget. And yet when you do the budget, you need to be realistic, as you say, but you also know where are you getting that bits of money from as well. So like when we do our budget, we set it for the year, and then we have another row that says, where are we getting that money from?
Yeah. And this is the tricky bit for us, because often our funding is unpredictable, yeah? And so that's the challenge for the board, is keeping an eye on that. So really the faith and hope principles of financial management shouldn't be directing how you do a budget, yeah? It needs to be realistic and based on fact.
It can't always happen that way though, can it?
No, but much as you know.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of our performances that we do. We just don't know what things are going to cost and how many bums on seats we're going to get and so on. It's
we look for patterns over years,
yeah.
You look at your history.
Yes, we do that.
The older the organisation is, the more they can look for patterns. But it is sometimes a bit of a guessing game. But just because it's a guessing game means we particularly have to keep our eye on that ball, yeah? And know where we've made those guesses and keep an eye on them so we don't get tripped up. So really encouraging you all to have a budget. Some accounting people I work with say that budgets should be fluid and that every month or every few months reviewed, because funding fluctuates and things look different. But I've also worked with other accountants and accounting people that say, no, once you set that budget, it stays there for the year and you only look at variations. I think it's just two different ways of looking at budgeting.
And then you have something like COVID-19 happening, which throws it out the window.
Absolutely throws it out the window. And we can't even budget because we don't know what's going to look like in a couple of weeks, yeah?
Right, absolutely.
These are the challenges for us. But at this particular time, boards should be doing an analysis of their funding and the risks to their funding and doing some worst case scenarios, yeah? And creating worst case scenario budgets for your organizations. So what's the adage? Is it like plan for the worst and hope for the best? Is that like a military term? Okay. Yeah.
Could you repeat that?
So plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So I quite like this slide about when we look at a budget, we want to, be realistic and see the reality of what's going on for us. I just want to spend the rest of our time looking at monitoring, and this is probably how most of you do your financial oversight on your boards, is through reports. We have two types of reports that come to us as board members. One is what we call a statement of financial performance. And in the old days, those were called profit and loss, income expenditure reports, statement of financial performance. As I said earlier, if your statement of financial performance is not comparing your performance with something else, it's a meaningless list of figures, yeah? So in this statement of financial performance, we're comparing with the previous year. This would be an annual one. But if you're monthly meeting, you'll want to be looking at your performance, your income and your expenditure against your budget, so you can see how you're tracking. The other type of report you'll be looking at is your statement of financial position. Statement of financial position used to be called a balance sheet in the old days. And basically your statement of financial position tells you how much money you have, how much assets you have in the organization. Are you solvent? Do you have enough money to do what you need to be able to do? How much money do we owe? How much money do we have sitting in the bank? So two quite different reports. One just tells us how much we're getting in and how much we're spending, and the other tells us how rich we are at this particular snap snapshot in time. Where a lot of boards get tripped up is when they look at their statements of financial position, they see that there's cash in the bank. They think, excellent, we can spend that. Not so, yeah? You have to make sure that some analysis is done of which funding is actually tagged and that you have to allocate to something that you've promised to do. And some organisations make sure that that goes into the liabilities. So sometimes in the liabilities, which is money that we owe, you'll see a line that has got like tagged funding or payments in advance. And that just keeps it away from your assets or your money in the bank. So just a few terms there for those of you who last took financial accounting in fourth form commerce. A liability is what we owe, an asset is what we own. And our equity is our wherewithal, yeah? Actually, how much are we worth right now at this point in time? So three terms that we need to know. So we have what's called the accounting equation. And basically the accounting equation is the assets minus liability equals equity. So we take away what we owe from what we have, that tells us actually what we are worth at this point in time. So this is called the accounting equation and is important for us when we're analysing statements of financial position. So team, I'm going to put you back in groups. Part of your handout was I sent you a statement of financial position and sent you a statement of financial performance. Your first job is to work out which one is which, and then just to have a look at it and see what questions or concerns you might have. If you were on the board of this organisation, what questions would you come back with? Or which questions would you ask the CEO or the treasurer? So I'm going to pop you into breakout. Anyone have any comments about that exercise?
Well, it's hard. It's really hard because you don't know what it's about.
Yep.
What's the business? What type of organization it is?
Yep.
And what's been in the planning? If you know that, then yeah, really
so
hard.
You didn't have
happening this year?
Joe?
We were discussing the need for, you talked about a 10% difference between your markers, and there's vastly bigger than 10% changes. So you'd want some narrative with what those changes are.
That's right. So it's not actually just the reports, yeah? We need the story behind those reports from the people who helped put them together. So not even an accountant could look at those reports and comfortably say, I know exactly what's going on here. They would be asking questions and need the context, they need narrative, they need the story behind what it is. And this is why we have to ask questions as board members, and why we have to have a culture where people can feel okay asking questions without feeling that they're stupid. Yeah. Any other comments?
And also, we've been discuss the vehicle. We different. When we back to the assets, you look at assets, how to different. Yeah, we've been talking about this.
So they look different for every organization, yeah?
Yes.
We have to know what's going on. Yeah. So our financial accountability is just part of the bigger picture that we do as board members. It's just part of the details that we're accountable for.
Great.
And you know what, when it comes to financial reporting team, as the board, it's your job to ask for the reports to be delivered in a way that you can understand, right? So you get to set what the report looks like. You say, we need to see this, we need to see that, and we need this to have this explained. You're steering the ship, and the information has to be presented in a way that's understandable for you. So a lot of organizations I work with once a year, or when they bring on new board members, they actually have a training when they look at the reports, and someone who's been on the board for a while or the treasurer will then give the board a little bit of a training program on what they're looking at, just for a couple of hours, how to interpret the reports and why they look like they do. So that should be like ongoing part of your board's development. Any other thoughts? I just want to share with you one last slide before we finish up. And that's like a lot of boards rely on their audit report to help them to decide, are we making sense? Are we tracking okay? But what we have to remember is our audit report does not tell us that what we are looking at is accurate. It just gives a view on the adequacy. So what it really says is the processes that we use to create these reports is sound, and that good accounting practices are in place in this organisation. It doesn't say this organisation is going bust if it continues to carry on how it is, or it doesn't say this organisation's got fantastic financial health. All it says is that what is presented is in order with good financial management practices. So the law is that charities with $1 million or more must be audited by a qualified accountant as part of the Charities Commission directives. Between 500,000 and $1 million, you must be reviewed by a qualified accountant. That means it doesn't have to be a full audit. What an auditor does is they will go to a certain part of the accounting cycle. So they'll grab some invoices, they'll grab some receipts, and they'll work their way through the system to make sure that the system is correct. They'll have a look at large expenditures and make sure that those expenditures were done well. They won't tell you whether it was a wise decision or not. They'll just tell you whether the process of making that expenditure was well. A reviewer doesn't go into that detail. They take more of a bigger picture. Charities Commission says less than 500,000, you're under no obligation, but you have to do what your constitution or your funder says otherwise. So if your constitution says that you have to have an audit, you must have an audit. Or if your constitution says you must get a review or a compilation, then you can just get a review. And the reason why that law was put in place was audits are really expensive, yeah? And for small organisations, it was a barrier to them succeeding. And it was funders were actually setting organisations up if they required them to have an audit. So the law was slightly changed. So team, don't rely on your audit, yeah? Rely only on the questions that you ask and on each other together, looking at your accounts and together working out what's going on in there. Any final questions? Or is everyone like, that's enough for a Monday night, thanks?
Yeah. It is, yeah.
Certainly my preference would be bring it to an earlier time next time, Sandy.
Yeah, so maybe that feedback to Bart, yeah?
Yeah.
I'd just like to say you've given us a lot to think about, and I realise that I took quite a lot for granted, and you've given us some ways of approaching the situation.
Yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Helpful.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
I love it.